Imagine stepping into the grand halls of Buckingham Palace in the late 19th century, where the glitter of chandeliers lit faces that would shape an entire era. Among them, one woman stood out not just for her beauty, but for her presence, her grace, and her ability to touch lives far beyond the marble walls of royal palaces. She was Alexandra of Denmark, who came to Britain as a young princess and eventually became one of the most beloved queens in history. To many, she was simply the consort of Edward VII, yet her story is far richer and far more fascinating. Alexandra was more than a figure at the side of a king. She was a cultural icon, a humanitarian, a mother whose children linked the royal houses of Europe, and a quiet force during times of turbulence and change. What makes Alexandra's life so compelling is the way she seemed to carry with her both fragility and strength. From her earliest days in Denmark, her family lived in modest circumstances compared to many of Europe's royal houses. Yet through the twists of dynastic fortune, she became destined for a life at the very center of Britain's monarchy. When she arrived in London, the people immediately adored her. Crowds cheered for her not out of duty, but out of genuine admiration. Her charm, her sense of style, and her warmth created an almost unbreakable bond with the public. She brought to the British court not just elegance, but a spirit of compassion that reached those who often felt ignored by royalty. But Alexandra's influence was not confined to Britain alone. She was a sister, a daughter, and a mother whose family ties stretched across Europe. Through her children and grandchildren, she helped create a network of alliances and connections that linked Britain to Denmark, Norway, Greece, and even Russia. She lived at a time when family gatherings of kings, queens, princes, and princesses doubled as political moments of significance. Yet those same ties carried tragedy, as the First World War revealed how fragile dynastic unity could be. Alexandra witnessed her own nephews, Wilhelm of Germany and Nicholas of Russia, pulled into a conflict that tore Europe apart. She watched the family web she had so carefully nurtured unravel under the pressures of nationalism and war. Still, her legacy did not fade with those tragedies. The values she embodied, kindness, service, and dignity, became part of the foundation upon which the modern British monarchy was built. Her grandchildren and great-grandchildren, from George VI to Elizabeth II, carried forward lessons she had taught through example. Even today, her descendants reign in Britain, Denmark, and Norway, ensuring that Alexandra's influence continues to shape the present. Her story is not only about royalty. It is about resilience, compassion, and the quiet power of a woman whose life transcended crowns and courts. It is a story of a queen who was more than a queen, a mother who was more than a mother, and a matriarch whose influence extended far beyond her own lifetime. Welcome to our channel Words of Time, and in this video we will explore the extraordinary journey of Queen Alexandra of Denmark, tracing how a young princess became one of the most captivating and enduring figures of European history. Alexandra of Denmark is often remembered in history as the consort of Edward VII, but when her life is examined more closely, it becomes clear that she was far more than the ornamental figure often expected of queens in the 19th century. Her story begins not with the grandeur of the British crown, but with the quieter, modest beginnings of a Danish princess whose family lived with limited means despite their royal blood. Born in Copenhagen in the early decades of the 19th century, she was the daughter of Prince Christian of Schleswig-Holstein-Sonderburg-Glucksburg, who would later ascend the throne of Denmark as King Christian IX. At the time of her birth, no one could have predicted that Alexandra would one day become the queen consort of the most powerful empire in the world. Her early life was shaped by simplicity, close family ties, and a natural charm that would later serve her well on the grand stage of Britain. The path from the Danish court to the British throne was not straightforward. In fact, Alexandra's marriage to the future Edward VII was not inevitable. The British royal family was carefully considering potential brides for the Prince of Wales, weighing political alliances, religious suitability, and personal character. Alexandra was not from one of the great ruling houses of Europe, and her family, though respected, did not command the same political influence as others. Yet it was precisely her modest background, combined with her grace, warmth, and steady character, that caught the attention of those seeking a suitable match for the prince. The British establishment desired someone who could soften the rough edges of the heir to the throne, and Alexandra's reputation for kindness and quiet dignity suggested she might be the right person. Her meeting with Edward, who was still known as Bertie within the family, proved pivotal. The prince had already begun to develop a reputation for recklessness and indulgence, causing worry to his mother, Queen Victoria, and to his father, Prince Albert. They hoped that marriage would settle him and provide him with a stabilizing influence. When Alexandra was introduced into his circle, she brought not only beauty, but also a gentle yet firm personality that complemented Edward's temperament. Their engagement, once agreed upon, was greeted with relief and excitement both in Britain and in Denmark. The match symbolized not only the union of two people, but also the strengthening of ties between Britain and Denmark, which was strategically important at a time of shifting European alliances. Alexandra's arrival in Britain was nothing short of a sensation. From the very beginning, she captivated the public with her beauty, elegance, and radiant charm. Newspapers of the time wrote extensively about her appearance, her manner of dress, and her demeanor. Crowds gathered eagerly to see her, and she was greeted with an affection that went beyond the usual enthusiasm for royal ceremonies. People saw in her something genuine, a warmth that contrasted with the sometimes stern and distant figure of Queen Victoria. Alexandra smiled readily, engaged with those around her, and displayed a natural ability to connect with people across social classes. This charm quickly won her a place in the hearts of the British people. Her wedding to Edward in St. George's Chapel at Windsor Castle was a magnificent occasion, attended by dignitaries from across Europe. Yet beyond the splendor of the ceremony, there was a sense of genuine joy among the public, who saw in Alexandra not only a new royal figure, but also a refreshing presence in the monarchy. She was not simply a bride chosen for political reasons, but a woman whose personal qualities resonated with the public mood. This connection would prove to be one of her greatest strengths throughout her life as consort and later queen. As the years passed, Alexandra's role expanded beyond that of wife and mother. She became a central figure at the British court, known not only for her beauty and style, but also for her active participation in charitable causes. At a time when women of her rank were often expected to remain in the background, she took on responsibilities that demonstrated her keen sense of duty and her desire to contribute meaningfully to society. She supported hospitals, particularly those dedicated to children and to those suffering from illness or injury. She made frequent visits to institutions that were often overlooked, showing compassion to individuals who were marginalized or forgotten. These actions earned her deep respect, as they revealed that her charm was not merely superficial, but was rooted in genuine concern for others. Alexandra also became an important figure in shaping the public image of the monarchy during a period when it faced challenges. Queen Victoria's long mourning after the death of Prince Albert had cast a shadow over the court, creating an atmosphere of gloom and detachment from the public. Alexandra, by contrast, brought vitality and visibility. She attended events, mingled with people, and projected a sense of optimism that helped to revive the popularity of the royal family. This was not simply a matter of personal charm. It was a deliberate effort on her part to fulfill her role as consort in a way that strengthened the institution she represented. She understood that the monarchy's survival depended on its ability to maintain a connection with the people, and she worked consistently to nurture that bond. Her influence was not limited to public appearances. Behind the scenes, Alexandra played a role in shaping Edward's approach to his duties. Although he never entirely abandoned his love of pleasure, his wife's steadiness provided balance. She did not attempt to dominate him or restrict his nature, but she offered guidance through her example. Her patience and loyalty were key in supporting him, even during difficult times when his behavior tested their marriage. Her ability to maintain dignity and composure ensured that scandal did not overshadow the monarchy, and her quiet strength helped preserve the image of stability that the royal family needed. Fashion also became one of the arenas in which Alexandra's influence was undeniable. She was regarded as a style icon, setting trends that were imitated not only in Britain but across Europe. Women copied her gowns, her jewelry, and even the way she wore her hair. Her sense of elegance was refined yet approachable, and it became part of her wider appeal. Through fashion, she projected modernity while retaining a sense of regal dignity, ensuring that the monarchy remained culturally relevant in a rapidly changing age. What might seem like a superficial realm was, in her hands, a subtle tool for reinforcing her popularity and shaping perceptions of the royal family. The popularity of Alexandra endured over decades, not simply because of her beauty or style, but because she consistently demonstrated qualities that the public admired. She embodied grace under pressure, kindness in her dealings with others, and an ability to balance her public and private roles. Her children were central to her life, and though she faced personal tragedies, including the loss of her youngest son, she bore them with remarkable resilience. These qualities deepened the public's respect, as they saw in her not only a queen, but also a woman who faced the challenges of life with courage. When Edward eventually ascended the throne as Edward VII after the death of Queen Victoria, Alexandra took on the role of queen consort with the same sense of purpose that had defined her earlier years. She stood beside him during his relatively short reign, offering support as he sought to modernize the monarchy and expand its ceremonial role. Together, they projected an image of dignity and grandeur that suited the era, but it was Alexandra's personal touch that continued to ensure the affection of the people. She remained deeply engaged in charitable work, further establishing a model of the consort as an active and compassionate partner in public life. Her strategic importance lay not only in her ability to charm the public, but also in her capacity to strengthen diplomatic ties. As a Danish princess who became Queen of Britain, she embodied the interconnections of European royalty. Her family ties extended to many of the reigning houses of Europe, and her presence at the British court symbolized alliances that carried political weight. She was more than a decorative figure. She was part of the broader web of relationships that influenced international affairs. Her role in fostering goodwill between nations was subtle but significant, and it reflected the complex ways in which royal marriages served as instruments of diplomacy. Looking back on Alexandra's life, it becomes clear that she represented a new kind of royal consort, one who combined personal warmth with strategic awareness. She understood the symbolic power of her position and used it thoughtfully to strengthen both the monarchy and the society in which it functioned. She navigated the challenges of her marriage, the expectations of her role, and the scrutiny of the public with remarkable skill. Her story is not simply that of a queen defined by her crown, but of a woman who, through character and action, shaped the monarchy in lasting ways. In many respects, Alexandra's legacy can be seen in the ways later consorts approached their roles. She set a precedent for engagement with the public, for active participation in charitable causes, and for the use of personal charm as a bridge between the monarchy and the people. She demonstrated that a queen consort could be both a supportive partner to her husband and an influential figure in her own right. Her life serves as a reminder that the history of monarchy is not only about kings and their reigns, but also about the women who stood beside them, shaping events and perceptions in ways that continue to resonate. Alexandra of Denmark, the rose who bloomed in the gardens of Britain, remains an enduring figure not because of the crown she wore, but because of the qualities she embodied. She brought light to a court that had been darkened by mourning, compassion to a society that valued hierarchy, and a personal charm that transcended the rigid structures of royalty. She was more than a queen. She was a symbol of grace, resilience, and quiet power. Through her journey from a modest Danish princess to the beloved Queen of the United Kingdom, she left a mark that extended far beyond her lifetime, reminding us that influence can be exercised not only through authority, but also through character, empathy, and the ability to connect with others. The story of Alexandra cannot end with her role as consort alone, for her influence extended into the next generation and beyond. Her position as mother and grandmother placed her at the center of a dynastic network that stretched across Europe. Through the marriages of her children and the bonds she cultivated, Alexandra became one of the most significant weavers of the royal web that connected thrones, courts, and nations. She was not only a queen, but also a matriarch whose family ties became threads in the grand tapestry of European politics. It was a time when royal marriages were not simply private unions, but instruments of diplomacy, and in this sphere Alexandra played a part that was as consequential as it was far-reaching. Her firstborn, Albert Victor, Duke of Clarence, was destined to be king before fate intervened. His engagement to Princess Mary of Teck seemed to secure continuity, but his untimely death left Alexandra devastated and the monarchy unsettled. Yet even in grief, she recognized the importance of ensuring stability. The engagement was transferred to his younger brother, George, who would later reign as George V. This arrangement preserved not only dynastic continuity, but also the connection with the Teck family, who, despite their modest background compared to other European dynasties, brought respectability and loyalty to the British royal house. Alexandra's acceptance of this arrangement demonstrated her pragmatic understanding of duty, even as a mother mourning a beloved son. Her daughter Louise married Alexander, Duke of Fife, a union that reflected both affection and political sense. Though the match was less about international diplomacy and more about consolidating influence within Britain, it still served to reinforce the bonds between the crown and the aristocracy. Louise's children, Alexandra and Maud, would carry the family line into new directions, and through them the legacy of their grandmother's role as a dynastic connector would extend further. Perhaps the most striking example of Alexandra's role as a royal matchmaker was the marriage of her daughter, Maud, to Prince Karl of Denmark, who later became King Haakon VII of Norway. This was a union that carried deep political significance. Norway, having dissolved its union with Sweden, was in search of a monarch who could provide legitimacy and stability to the newly independent state. By marrying Maud, Prince Karl strengthened the ties between Britain and Norway, with Alexandra's blessing and encouragement ensuring the match was not only suitable but also strategically advantageous. Through her daughter, Alexandra became the grandmother of King Olav V of Norway, linking the British crown to Scandinavian monarchies in ways that carried long-term significance. Another of her daughters, Victoria, remained unmarried, dedicating much of her life to her mother and to the family. Yet even through her presence in court and her close bond with Alexandra, she served as a quiet supporter of the dynastic vision her mother upheld. The absence of marriage did not diminish her role in the web of relationships that Alexandra carefully tended, for she was a trusted confidant and ally within the royal household. Alexandra's son George, who married Mary of Teck, ascended the throne as George V. Their children would go on to occupy key positions in European history, with Edward VIII, George VI, and their descendants shaping the monarchy into the modern age. Alexandra, as grandmother, had influence in their upbringing, imparting her sense of duty and grace to a generation that would face unprecedented challenges, including the upheaval of the First World War. The political impact of these marriages became especially clear when Europe descended into conflict in the early 20th century. Alexandra's family ties linked Britain to Denmark, Norway, Russia, and Greece, and even to Germany. Her sister Dagmar, who became Empress Maria Fyodorovna of Russia, was mother to Tsar Nicholas II, making Alexandra the aunt of the last Russian emperor. Her brother George I of Greece extended her influence into the Balkans, while her sister Thyra married into Hanoverian royalty. This vast network of relations created a situation where many of the leaders of warring nations were in fact close relatives. The First World War has often been described as a family quarrel among cousins, and Alexandra's descendants and relatives were at the very center of it. The intricate family tree she helped cultivate reveals how dynastic politics intertwined with personal relationships. Her grandson George VI stood against his cousin Wilhelm II of Germany, while her great-nephew Nicholas II of Russia fought alongside Britain in alliance against Germany. These conflicts demonstrated both the limits and the paradox of dynastic diplomacy. While marriages could bind nations in peace, they could not prevent the tide of nationalism, militarism, and political rivalries that erupted into war. Alexandra herself, though deeply loyal to her British identity, grieved over the suffering of her extended family, particularly the tragic fate of the Russian imperial family during the Revolution. Her sorrow was compounded by the knowledge that the bonds of blood had not been enough to avert catastrophe. Yet it would be wrong to view these connections solely through the lens of war. In many respects, Alexandra's dynastic influence created a shared culture among European royalty, one that outlasted the conflicts of the 20th century. Her descendants continued to reign in Britain, Norway, Denmark, and Greece, weaving a legacy of continuity that extended into the present. Her great-granddaughter Elizabeth II carried forward the sense of duty and devotion to the public that Alexandra embodied, ensuring that her influence remained visible long after her death. Alexandra's success as a matchmaker was not the result of cold calculation alone. She combined political awareness with genuine maternal care. She wished her children happiness, yet she understood that their marriages had to serve a higher purpose. She balanced personal affection with dynastic duty, ensuring that each union strengthened the position of the family and the monarchy as a whole. In this respect, she reflected the dual nature of royalty in her era, where personal lives were inseparable from political destinies. Her ability to navigate these complexities owed much to her own background. Having grown up in a modest branch of the Danish royal family, she understood both the vulnerabilities and the opportunities of dynastic marriage. She knew what it meant to be chosen as a consort for political reasons, and she brought that experience into the way she guided her children. She wanted them to find stability and purpose, even if their paths were shaped by forces larger than themselves. Through this perspective, she became not only a queen but also a strategist whose family building left a lasting imprint on European history. The image of Alexandra as the Danish rose, beloved by her people and admired across Europe, is incomplete without recognizing her role as the grand web weaver of dynastic connections. Her beauty and charm won the hearts of the British public, but her vision and resilience shaped the destiny of her children and their descendants. She understood that royalty was not simply about crowns and ceremonies, but about relationships, both personal and political, that could secure the future of nations. Her influence reached far beyond her lifetime, echoing through the reigns of her grandchildren and great-grandchildren, whose positions on European thrones were in many ways the result of the foundations she helped lay. By the time of her death in the early 20th century, Alexandra had witnessed immense change. She had seen her husband ascend the throne and pass away, leaving her as Queen Mother. She had seen her children take on roles that connected Britain to other monarchies. She had seen Europe slide into war despite the family ties that bound its rulers. And she had seen the monarchy she helped strengthen emerge with a renewed sense of purpose. Her legacy was one of grace, resilience, and farsightedness, qualities that made her more than a consort and more than a queen. She was a mother and grandmother who understood the power of family, not only within the walls of a palace, but across the borders of nations. Her life, from the modest beginnings in Copenhagen to the heights of the British throne, was marked by an awareness of responsibility and the ability to use her position to shape the future. Alexandra remains a figure of enduring fascination because she exemplified the possibility of combining personal warmth with strategic vision. She was at once beloved by the public for her charm and admired by historians for her role in weaving the dynastic fabric of Europe. She stands as a reminder that influence is not always wielded through formal power or overt authority. Sometimes it lies in the ability to connect, to nurture, and to build networks that last long after the individual is gone. In this way, Alexandra's story is not only that of a queen beyond the crown, but also of a grand web weaver whose legacy stretched across generations. Her children and their descendants carried her influence into the 20th century, shaping both the tragedies and the triumphs of European history. She left behind not just memories of beauty and grace, but a living network of relationships that defined an age. Through her, the Danish rose became a symbol of continuity and connection, a reminder that even in a world of empires and wars, the bonds of family and the choices of one woman could shape the destiny of nations. Alexandra's weaving of dynastic connections across Europe was not the end of her influence, for her life also represented an extraordinary contribution to British society and culture in ways that touched both the highest circles and the lives of ordinary people. Beyond the role of matchmaker, she became an icon whose presence shaped not only politics but also art, fashion, philanthropy, and the broader sense of what it meant to have a monarchy that lived in relationship with the people. The foundations she laid in her personal family life extended outward into the public sphere, where she became a symbol of compassion, refinement, and national unity. From the earliest years of her life in Britain, Alexandra cultivated an image that balanced dignity with accessibility. She was aware that the monarchy depended not only on tradition and ceremony, but also on the affections of its people. In this regard, she brought a freshness to the royal family at a time when Queen Victoria remained withdrawn from public life after the death of Prince Albert. Alexandra was different. She did not confine herself to palaces and private gardens. She ventured into hospitals, charitable institutions, and public events with a sense of genuine warmth that made her beloved among subjects who rarely saw royalty as approachable. In her, the people saw someone who seemed to care for them, and this was no superficial impression. She truly believed in the moral duty of her position, using her resources and her influence to support causes that others in her rank might have overlooked. One of her earliest and most enduring contributions lay in her patronage of hospitals and medical institutions. Alexandra had a personal interest in health and well-being, and she frequently visited patients, not only to offer royal endorsement, but also to provide comfort through her presence. She established the London Hospital's Alexandra Rose Day, a charitable tradition in which artificial roses were sold to raise funds for medical causes. The rose, already a symbol associated with her, became a token of generosity and public participation in philanthropy. This initiative not only raised substantial money for hospitals, but also fostered a sense of communal involvement in charity, allowing ordinary people to take part in a cause connected to the queen they admired. Her compassion was not selective. She gave support to institutions dedicated to the care of blind people, disabled children, and veterans, reflecting her recognition of those whose suffering was often neglected by mainstream society. At a time when poverty and illness were rampant in industrial Britain, her actions stood out as demonstrations of a humane conscience at the heart of the monarchy. Alexandra did not lecture the nation on morality. Instead, she led through example, offering her time, her attention, and her patronage to those who needed it most. This willingness to step beyond the ceremonial role of consort marked her as a new type of royal figure, one who merged compassion with public service in ways that resonated deeply. Her influence extended also into the realm of culture and fashion, which in her hands became instruments of connection and renewal. Alexandra's beauty and elegance were celebrated widely, but she used these qualities not for vanity, but for symbolism. She became the standard of style in Britain and beyond, and the choices she made in her dress and appearance influenced entire generations of women. From her gowns to her jewelry, and even to her distinctive way of wearing chokers that covered a scar on her neck, she set trends that were faithfully copied by society women. This was not merely frivolous imitation. Fashion in her era served as a language of identity and aspiration, and Alexandra's choices allowed women to feel closer to the queen they admired. In her elegance, there was something both regal and approachable, and this balance gave her a rare cultural power. Artists, photographers, and designers were inspired by her presence, and she became a muse in portraits and visual representations that circulated widely. Through these images, the public encountered not an aloof figure, but a graceful woman whose beauty was softened by warmth. She embodied an ideal of femininity that was dignified yet human, and this helped to restore the monarchy's image during a period when Queen Victoria's seclusion had risked alienating the crown from the people. Alexandra's cultural influence, therefore, was not simply about dresses and jewelry. It was about re-establishing the monarchy's relevance in a changing world. The world she lived in was indeed one of profound transformation. Industrialization had altered the social fabric of Britain, urbanization was reshaping communities, and political movements were beginning to challenge the old order. In this context, Alexandra's presence offered continuity without rigidity. She became a bridge between tradition and change, embodying stability while engaging with the modern realities of philanthropy, public presence, and even subtle diplomacy. She understood that monarchy could not remain aloof if it wished to survive, and so she positioned herself as a figure who symbolized both heritage and compassion. Her charitable efforts were not confined to Britain alone. Through her family ties and her position as consort, she promoted goodwill among nations, subtly using her role to encourage understanding and peace. Her personal visits abroad, though often framed as ceremonial, carried deeper meaning. She represented not only the British monarchy, but also the possibility of friendship between nations connected through family bonds and shared values. She used her influence to support relief efforts during times of conflict, demonstrating that royalty could stand as a moral voice even when politics were fraught. This was most evident in her concern for soldiers and their families, as she took an active interest in organizations dedicated to the welfare of those affected by war. It is important to understand that Alexandra's influence did not rest on formal power. She was not a ruler in the sense of commanding armies or directing policies. Her power lay in the softer realms of culture, charity, and public affection. Yet this influence was profound, because it shaped how people perceived the monarchy and how they connected emotionally to the institution. The respect and love she inspired were assets to the crown, stabilizing it in an age when republican ideas were beginning to gain traction in parts of Europe. Alexandra, by embodying the monarchy's human face, countered cynicism and built trust. Her personal qualities enhanced this role. She was modest despite her status, gentle in manner, and approachable in spirit. She did not speak condescendingly to those she visited, nor did she maintain excessive distance. Instead, she engaged with people on terms that felt respectful and genuine. This ability to connect was rare in her position, and it was part of why she remained beloved throughout her life. Even as she grew older and her health declined, the affection of the public did not wane. She had earned it not through spectacle, but through consistent acts of kindness and a lifetime of service. Her legacy in philanthropy continued long after her passing. The institutions she supported thrived, and the tradition of royal involvement in charitable causes became a defining feature of the British monarchy. Later generations of royals followed her example, recognizing that the survival of the crown in the modern world depended not only on constitutional authority, but also on moral and charitable leadership. In this sense, Alexandra was a pioneer, establishing a model that shaped the roles of queens and consorts who came after her. The breadth of her cultural impact can also be seen in literature and social commentary of her time. Writers and commentators often referred to her as the people's queen, a term that captured her popularity and the sense of closeness she fostered. She became a symbol of continuity and stability, particularly during times of uncertainty. Her presence reassured the public that the monarchy was not only an institution of power, but also a source of compassion and unity. This perception was invaluable in maintaining the monarchy's legitimacy, especially as political movements began to challenge the old hierarchies of society. The subtlety with which she used her position to promote peace and understanding was remarkable. She was never loud or forceful, yet her influence was felt in the quiet ways she bridged divides, encouraged dialogue, and reminded leaders of their shared humanity. In her family connections across Europe, she saw opportunities for friendship, and she worked to maintain those ties even when politics grew strained. She was deeply saddened when war tore her family apart, yet she continued to advocate for compassion and relief, demonstrating that even in the darkest times, a royal figure could stand for higher ideals. Alexandra's life, when considered in its fullness, reveals a figure who was far more than a consort or a decorative presence at court. She was a strategic mother, a cultural icon, a compassionate philanthropist, and a subtle diplomat. She understood her role not as passive but as active, shaping both her family and her society in ways that endured. She remains remembered not only for her beauty, but for the strength of her character and the depth of her humanity. Her influence did not end with her death, for her descendants carried forward the example she set. The tradition of royal philanthropy, the importance of public connection, and the use of personal charm to support national unity became hallmarks of the British monarchy in the 20th century and beyond. Alexandra had shown that queenship was not about jewels and ceremonies alone, but about the responsibility to serve and to connect. In this sense, she truly was a queen beyond the crown, a woman whose rose-like beauty was matched by a fragrance of kindness and grace that lingered long after she had gone. From her modest childhood in Denmark to her role as queen consort and queen mother in Britain, Alexandra's life was a journey that shaped history. She strengthened dynastic ties, she inspired through culture and fashion, and she gave tirelessly to charitable causes. She won the love of her people not by demanding it, but by earning it, through sincerity, service, and humanity. She subtly encouraged peace, she softened divisions, and she represented the best possibilities of monarchy in a changing age. Her story remains one of resilience, compassion, and lasting influence, a reminder that true power often lies not in crowns or thrones, but in the ability to touch hearts and to weave connections that outlast the storms of history. As Alexandra aged, the world around her changed in ways that even her grace and influence could not control. She had built her legacy through compassion, philanthropy, and a gift for weaving family connections that stretched across nearly every throne in Europe. She had shaped the monarchy's cultural role in Britain, softened divisions within society, and brought dignity to her family's public life. Yet the same extended network of relatives that she cultivated as bonds of unity also became, in the eyes of history, a stage for conflict. The 20th century dawned with the shadow of tensions that would engulf the continent in war, and Alexandra, the Danish rose who had dedicated her life to harmony, found herself watching as family ties became entangled in political rivalries far larger than any individual could overcome. Among the most striking figures in this drama was her nephew Wilhelm II of Germany, known for his restless ambition, fiery personality, and uneasy relationship with his British relatives. Wilhelm was the eldest grandson of Queen Victoria through her eldest daughter, and therefore he was Alexandra's nephew by marriage, as well as by dynastic kinship. His visits to Britain, frequent in his youth, revealed the contradictions of his character. He admired the grandeur of the British Empire, yet envied and resented its supremacy. He expressed affection for his English relatives, but often undermined them with impulsive remarks and erratic diplomacy. Alexandra saw in him a young man full of charm and energy, but she also recognized the volatility that would later unsettle Europe. Her ties to Russia were even closer. Through her beloved sister Dagmar, who became Empress Maria Fyodorovna, Alexandra was aunt to Tsar Nicholas II. Nicholas, gentle in manner and deeply devoted to his family, seemed at first the very opposite of Wilhelm. Where Wilhelm was forceful, Nicholas was hesitant. Where Wilhelm projected confidence, Nicholas struggled with indecision. Yet both men bore crowns in an age when monarchs could no longer rule with unquestioned authority. Alexandra maintained a close bond with her sister in Russia, and by extension, with Nicholas himself. She had great affection for him, recognizing both his sincerity and his limitations. Her concern for his fate, especially as revolutionary forces grew in Russia, weighed heavily on her in her later years. The irony of Alexandra's position was stark. She had spent her life weaving a web of family ties meant to strengthen peace. Yet as the 19th century gave way to the 20th, those same ties revealed their fragility. Her grandson George V sat on the throne of Britain, her nephew Wilhelm II commanded the German Empire, and her nephew Nicholas II ruled Russia. These three men, all related by blood and bound by shared childhood memories, would soon be cast as enemies in the greatest conflict the modern world had seen. It was not only a clash of nations but also, in many ways, a quarrel of cousins. Alexandra, who had hoped her family would be a bridge of peace, could only watch as the bonds she cherished dissolved under the pressure of politics, militarism, and nationalism. Wilhelm's growing estrangement from his British relatives was a source of disappointment for Alexandra. He often tried to assert himself during family gatherings, boasting of German might and criticizing British policies. His insecurity, born partly from a physical disability at birth and partly from his complex relationship with his grandmother Victoria, often drove him to overcompensate with bluster and aggression. Alexandra, with her gentle temperament, sought to smooth these tensions, offering kindness and avoiding direct confrontation. Yet even she could not ease the rivalry between Britain and Germany, which had moved beyond family into the realm of global strategy, colonial competition, and naval arms races. Nicholas presented a different challenge. Alexandra admired his devotion to his wife and children, and she sympathized with his struggle to rule a vast empire beset by unrest. She encouraged her sister in Russia, offering comfort and advice through letters. Yet she knew that Nicholas was ill-equipped to handle the pressures of revolution, industrial strikes, and political reform. His reliance on tradition and his reluctance to adapt left him vulnerable. Alexandra's influence could not extend deeply into Russian politics, though she wished fervently for her nephew's stability and safety. The bond of sisterhood with Dagmar meant that the tragedies of Russia struck her personally, piercing the veil of dynastic distance. The gathering storm of war revealed the limits of Alexandra's influence more clearly than anything else. She had shaped fashion, philanthropy, and family life with great success, but the tides of geopolitics swept beyond her reach. Naval competition between Britain and Germany, alliances entangling Russia and France with Britain, and crises in the Balkans all converged into a situation that no personal diplomacy could defuse. Alexandra, with her heart bound to family, believed that blood ties should have softened enmities. She hoped that cousinly affection might hold some sway. But the early years of the 20th century showed that monarchy itself was no longer the binding force it once had been. Nations were driven by public opinion, parliaments and generals and monarchs, however illustrious, could not dictate peace at will. Her sorrow grew as she witnessed Wilhelm's reckless policies deepen suspicion, and as Nicholas faced revolution with faltering steps. She understood that her own Britain was not free of tension either, but she had faith in her son George, whose steady character reminded her of the virtues she had always sought to uphold. Still, she could not ignore the fact that Europe was sliding toward confrontation. The assassination of Archduke Franz Ferdinand in Sarajevo, the sparks of nationalism in the Balkans, and the chain of mobilizations and declarations that followed drew her extended family into opposing camps almost overnight. Cousins who once gathered for weddings and holidays now faced one another across battlefields. For Alexandra, the outbreak of war in 1914 was both a public and a personal tragedy. Publicly, she stood by her son George and by Britain's determination to fulfill its obligations to allies and defend its interests. Privately, she grieved that the conflict placed her family in mortal danger. She feared for Nicholas, knowing that Russia's instability might spell disaster for him and his children. She recoiled from Wilhelm's aggressive stance, saddened that the nephew she had once welcomed with affection had become the adversary of her adopted nation. The war tore apart the very web she had worked her life to weave, proving that dynastic ties, however strong, could not withstand the forces of modern geopolitics. As the war dragged on, Alexandra's health declined, but her concern for her relatives did not diminish. She followed reports from Russia with anguish, praying for her sister and her nephew. The news of the Russian Revolution and the abdication of Nicholas devastated her. The subsequent execution of the Tsar and his family in 1918 was a blow from which she never fully recovered. For Alexandra, this was not only the end of a dynasty, but also the shattering of a beloved sister's world. She mourned personally and profoundly, feeling that part of her own life had been torn away. Her inability to protect or influence events in Russia underscored the painful reality that her reach, though vast in earlier years, was powerless against the tidal wave of revolution. The relationship with Wilhelm also weighed heavily in her final years. His abdication in 1918 and exile reflected the collapse of German monarchy, a fall as dramatic as that of Russia's. Alexandra, though deeply critical of his role in the conflict, still regarded him as family, and his downfall symbolized for her the destruction of the dynastic world she had known. The war had not only devastated nations, but had also shattered the very idea that monarchy could hold Europe together. Alexandra, who had once been the rose at the heart of a blossoming family web, lived to see the garden consumed by fire. In Britain, she found solace in her son George, who guided the monarchy through the war with steady hands. His decision to change the family name to Windsor, distancing it from German associations, was a pragmatic act that ensured the survival of the crown. Alexandra, though saddened by the need for such measures, recognized their necessity. She understood that the monarchy had to adapt if it was to endure in the new world forged by war. The philanthropy, compassion, and public connection she had fostered earlier in her life helped provide a foundation for this adaptation. Her example had shown that monarchy could thrive by being close to the people, even when the dynastic web of Europe collapsed around it. The irony of Alexandra's story lies in the contrast between her vision and the reality that unfolded. She had believed that family ties across Europe could act as safeguards against conflict, that cousins and siblings who shared blood could never become mortal enemies. Yet the First World War proved that national interest, military ambition, and political upheaval outweighed even the closest of kinships. Her influence, while immense in shaping culture and charity, was powerless to redirect the course of history when nations moved toward war. This reality did not diminish her achievements, but it revealed the limits of personal diplomacy in an age of mass politics and mechanized conflict. Alexandra's final years were marked by reflection and sorrow, but also by quiet dignity. She lived to see the end of the war, the collapse of empires, and the survival of her own British monarchy. She remained beloved by the people, who remembered her as a queen of compassion and grace. She had been more than a consort, more than a mother, more than a matchmaker. She had been a symbol of continuity and kindness, a figure who touched lives beyond palace walls. Yet she had also been a witness to tragedy, watching as the family web she cherished became undone by forces greater than any one person. Her life, from the modest beginnings in Denmark to the grandeur of the British throne, was a testament to the possibilities and limits of influence. She had shaped dynasties, nurtured culture, and comforted the suffering. She had inspired devotion in her adopted country and admiration abroad. But she had also lived long enough to see that no web, however finely woven, could bind nations against the tide of history. The gathering storm of the early 20th century swept away monarchies, shattered families, and redrew the map of Europe, leaving Alexandra to mourn, but also to know that her own example would endure where crowns and empires did not. Alexandra's legacy was not in the power she wielded, but in the humanity she embodied. She proved that monarchy could be more than authority and ceremony. It could be compassion, service, and connection. Even as her family ties failed to prevent war, the love she inspired among her people sustained the institution she represented. The Danish rose had blossomed far beyond the crown, leaving behind a fragrance of kindness and resilience that could not be destroyed by war. Her influence, though unable to halt the inevitable, shaped the spirit of monarchy for generations, reminding the world that even in times of storm, the quiet strength of character can endure. When the guns fell silent in November of 1918, Alexandra was left to reflect on a world utterly transformed. The dynastic map she had spent a lifetime weaving had been torn apart, with monarchies in Germany, Austria, and Russia swept away by defeat and revolution. Yet while thrones crumbled across Europe, the monarchy in Britain endured, partly because it had adapted and partly because it retained the love of the people. Alexandra, though in declining health, lived long enough to see that her example had helped sustain this survival. Her compassion, her public devotion, and her model of queenship had created a reservoir of goodwill that her son George and her descendants could draw upon in the uncertain years after the war. In this way, she became more than a queen consort or queen mother. She was remembered as a matriarch whose influence reached beyond national borders and whose legacy would continue to shape the royal houses of Europe long after her passing. In Britain, her impact on the monarchy's survival after the war was profound, even if it was not always openly acknowledged. Her son George V faced enormous challenges in maintaining legitimacy while revolutionary fervor spread across Europe. The murder of the Russian imperial family was a brutal reminder of what could happen to monarchs who lost their connection with their people. George's decision to adapt the monarchy, simplifying its image and bringing it closer to the people, reflected lessons that Alexandra had demonstrated throughout her life. She had shown that dignity could be combined with accessibility, that fashion and public presence could shape cultural identity, and that charity was not a luxury but a duty. These lessons, absorbed by her son and passed to her grandchildren, became central to the modern British monarchy. Alexandra's model of compassion and resilience gave the institution a human face at a time when crowns everywhere were toppling. Her descendants carried this influence into the 20th and 21st centuries. Her grandson George VI, who came to the throne after the abdication of his brother Edward VIII, embodied many of Alexandra's qualities. He was reserved, yet he possessed a quiet determination and devotion to duty that reflected his grandmother's strength of character. During the Second World War, his resolve and his wife's visible solidarity with the British people echoed the example Alexandra had set during her lifetime of showing compassion in times of crisis. Her great-granddaughter Elizabeth II became perhaps the clearest heir to her example. Elizabeth's long reign was built upon a foundation of duty, service, and connection with the people, qualities Alexandra had lived by decades earlier. In this way, the Danish rose who had blossomed in Victorian Britain cast her fragrance far into the modern age, shaping the spirit of monarchy for more than a century. The legacy of Alexandra did not end in Britain. Through the marriages she had arranged and the connections she had nurtured, her bloodline extended into nearly every European royal house that survived the wars of the 20th century. Her daughter Maud, who became Queen of Norway, ensured that Alexandra's descendants would continue to reign in Scandinavia. Maud's son Olav V, and later her grandson Harald V, embodied the same blend of dignity and accessibility that had defined Alexandra's example. The Norwegian monarchy became one of the most trusted institutions in that nation, in part because it carried forward traditions of compassion and service rooted in Alexandra's legacy. Her influence reached Denmark as well, the land of her birth. Her family there, through her brothers and sisters, carried on the Glucksberg dynasty, which still reigns today. Her great-great-granddaughter Margrethe II has been Queen of Denmark since the 1970s, admired for her intellect, artistic pursuits, and dedication to duty. The continuity of values across generations reflects the enduring influence of Alexandra's upbringing and her model of queenship. What had begun in the modest circumstances of her childhood in Copenhagen came full circle in the thriving monarchy of Denmark, which stands today as one of the most respected in Europe. Greece, too, bore the mark of Alexandra's legacy. Her brother George I had established the Greek monarchy, and though it faced upheaval and exile over the 20th century, its connections to Alexandra's line remained strong. Her great-grandson Constantine II reigned during the turbulent 1960s before being deposed, yet even in exile the family remained tied to Alexandra's vision of royalty as service and duty. The interconnections she had woven across Scandinavia, Greece, Russia, Denmark, and Britain revealed her as a central matriarch of European royalty, a figure whose descendants today sit on multiple thrones and whose values continue to shape how monarchies adapt in the modern world. The tragedies of her extended family, particularly the loss of her sister Dagmar's children in Russia, were never forgotten by Alexandra's descendants. The memory of the Romanovs' fate became a sobering reminder of the fragility of monarchy, and it shaped the cautious yet devoted approach of later generations. Alexandra's life had spanned from a world of seemingly unshakable dynastic security to one in which thrones could fall overnight. This perspective was inherited by her grandchildren and great-grandchildren, who understood that survival depended not on tradition alone, but on the trust and affection of the people. In this sense, Alexandra's matriarchal role extended not only through bloodlines, but also through the lessons embedded in her example. Her enduring legacy also lies in the image she cultivated as a queen who transcended national borders. Though she was fiercely loyal to Britain once she became its queen, she never lost her Danish identity, nor did she sever ties with her siblings and relatives abroad. She maintained correspondence with her sister in Russia until the Revolution. She supported her brothers in Denmark and Greece, and she welcomed her extended family in gatherings that sought to maintain unity in a divided world. Even when politics turned cousins into enemies, Alexandra never stopped believing in the power of family to serve as a bridge between nations. Her personal failure to prevent war did not erase the significance of this vision. Instead, it cast her as a symbol of what might have been, a reminder that kinship and compassion had the potential to counteract the divisions of nationalism and conflict, even if history moved in another direction. When historians speak of Alexandra, they often describe her beauty, her elegance, and her popularity. These were indeed important, but they were only the surface of a much deeper influence. Her real legacy lies in the monarchy's survival in Britain, the continuity of her descendants across European thrones, and the moral example she set through a life of service and kindness. She demonstrated that monarchy could adapt without losing dignity, that it could inspire loyalty not through power, but through compassion. She showed that a queen could be both regal and approachable, both a matriarch of a family and a symbol of unity for a nation. In her final years, Alexandra was often frail and withdrawn, yet the affection of the people never diminished. When she died in 1925, there was an outpouring of grief across Britain, a reflection of the deep connection she had nurtured for more than half a century. Crowds lined the streets to pay respects, not out of obligation but out of genuine love for a queen who had touched their lives. She had entered Britain as a young bride from Denmark, and she left it as one of the most beloved figures in the history of the monarchy. Her memory endured not as a distant sovereign, but as a motherly figure who embodied continuity and compassion in times of change. The matriarchal role she played continues to echo through the present day. Her descendants today reign in Britain, Denmark, and Norway, while her bloodline flows through Greece and Spain as well. These connections remind us that Alexandra's vision of royalty as family was not a dream lost to war, but a reality that survived in new forms. The modern European monarchies, constitutional and symbolic, carry forward her example of service, unity, and dignity. She may not have prevented the Great War, but she laid the foundation for monarchies to survive in its aftermath, proving that personal qualities of kindness and resilience could be as vital as armies and treaties. Alexandra's story concludes with a paradox. She was at once a symbol of the old dynastic Europe and a pioneer of a new kind of monarchy. She represented the web of royal kinship that once bound nations together, yet she also modeled the modern vision of monarchy as service to the people. She saw her family torn apart by war, yet her descendants carried her example into the future, ensuring that her influence would outlast the collapse of empires. She was both a queen beyond the crown and a matriarch whose legacy spanned continents and centuries. The Danish rose that bloomed in Britain never withered, for her fragrance lingered in the values she instilled, the connections she fostered, and the monarchies that still looked to her example. Alexandra's life reminds us that true influence is not measured by treaties signed or wars won, but by the ability to shape hearts, families, and traditions in ways that endure. She transcended the limits of her era, embodying compassion in a world that often preferred power, and unity in a world that drifted toward division. Her descendants continue to reign, her example continues to inspire, and her story continues to show that even in a divided world, the vision of a matriarch can bind generations together.